Leader Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Senate Bill 2199 is an administration bill, and it deals with the designation of special days of observance that are in the code. I want to start off by saying that this bill, despite its caption, is not singling out any particular day of observance. And this is not a bill that speaks to or attempts to deal with the popularity or the controversy surrounding any particular day of observance. Under current law, Mr. Chairman, a governor who is elected by the people of Tennessee upon assuming office is required on certain days, and there's a fairly long list I could read off to you here. It's a number of days and it's a number of weeks that the governor is compelled by law to pull out a proclamation and sign. So the law requires the governor to proclaim something. And that's been in the books for a while. I've heard other governors, I won't mention any, that this rubbed the wrong way. The bill that's before you would simply say that those days of special observance are still in the code, but it won't require a governor to take his or her pen out and sign a piece of paper, which is the current law. The governor is free to proclaim days and designate days. The General Assembly is free to set days and designate days. And we are not removing any of those days that are in the code with this bill. We are simply recognizing them as a day of special observance, but we're not requiring the governor to take a particular action. So I would submit to the committee's consideration that this is a separation of powers type of bill. And while we're all familiar with the concept that we cannot bind a future General Assembly, we cannot pass a law that says a future General Assembly must do something or must not do something. And I would submit that the law as it currently stands contradicts that with respect to our chief executive, because it does compel and require the governor to do a certain action, to perform a certain action, which is to proclaim these days of special observance. I will point a few out. Some are fairly innocuous and some are more controversial. One of the days is Mother's Day. The law requires the governor to sign a proclamation on Mother's Day. Now, I can tell you, Governor Lee loves his mother, and we love our mothers too. This is not singling out that we don't want to recognize and observe Mother's Day. This is about a separation of powers issue that we shouldn't have it in the law, that requires a governor who is elected by the people of Tennessee, duly and constitutionally elected, to perform a certain action relative to these days of observance. So happy to answer any questions about it, Mr. Chairman, but that's simply what the bill does. Mm-hmm.
Okay, to have it properly before the committee on Senate Bill 2199, the chair moves the bill. Do we have a second? Okay, Senator Reeves seconds the bill, so we have it properly before the committee. Do we have any questions for the bill sponsor? Senator Yarbro.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I get the procedural posture, we have moved the bill but not the amendment at this point, correct? So,
okay, the chair moves.
Oh no, I actually want to ask this question before we get into that, because I believe that the leader and the sponsor of the legislation for the administration, in talking about the separation of powers piece, really is talking about the amendment, because the bill that's been moved does very much single one day out. The bill as drafted simply eliminates the Nathan Bedford Forrest holiday as a state holiday. That's the 15.2.101 is the code section, which requires that each year it is the duty of the governor of this state to proclaim the following as days of special observance, and then it lists a series of holidays. And what the bill in its current form before the committee just eliminates one of those. It doesn't deal with separation of powers. And I think the reason I want to speak to this is I think there are a lot of people that signed on as co-sponsors of this legislation as it was drafted and as it was filed to do just this, because they appreciated the governor taking leadership on this particular issue. And I think that we should think long and hard before we amend it to a more general, statement about not proclaiming anything. I appreciate the attempt of neutrality in the description, but I don't think there's anybody here that thinks that the governor wanted this legislation passed in order to avoid, because he was concerned from separation of powers, that we were making him proclaim Mother's Day. The bill in its current form is one that we ought to pass. And, I'm sure, like other members, I know that I received numerous emails about this that had lots of historical argumentation about General Forrest, and this is in some ways personal to me. This is something that, I grew up about 30 miles from Fort Pillow, have family that were served in this cavalry unit. I've grown up with this history my whole life, and I think that it's time that we actually reckon with it here, because this is a holiday that is, it exists for someone who rose from rags to riches by selling people, right? Like literally selling human beings down the river into deep plantations, deep South slavery. Somebody who admitted at the beginning of the Civil War that this was a fight about slavery, rose unquestionably talented military commander, but rose from private to general, but is tarnished by being the leader of one of the most, frankly, shameful incidents in the history of the United States military, where, hundreds of United States soldiers were massacred at Fort Pillow. After the war, we're all familiar with the fact that the Ku Klux Klan was founded in the state. The first big, sort of gathering of numerous Ku Klux Klan organizations happened about 4 or 5 blocks from here, the old Maxwell House Hotel. General Forrest, after the war in 1868, in interviews that he conducted himself, talking on the record to reporters, publicly endorsing what the Ku Klux Klan was doing, publicly calling or doing what was absolutely seen at the time as threatening the lives of members of this body who had voted to ratify the 13th and 14th Amendments. And in the hopes of switching the tide of the upcoming elections, and was successful at it, because 2 years later, our state had backed up. We rejected the 15th Amendment, which was only passed here in 1997. We adopted a new constitution that had a poll tax. We elected a Ku Klux Klan member as governor in 1870. And by 1875, it passed the first segregation measure in the history of the United States in this body. And I think all this history is known. Like most of there are primary sources and verifications for all those things. When we passed this as a legislature into existence, it was 1921 when the Ku Klux Klan was having a resurgence. This is absolutely what the recognizing Nathan Bedford Forrest as the founder, as the leader, not founder, of the Ku Klux Klan was very much what the impression of those groups was at the time. And that's what our impression was when we passed this law as a legislature in 1921. We changed the law a little bit in 1969, a year after Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis. We stopped taking the day off for this holiday, backed up on it somewhat. But we preserved it as a holiday. And what the amendment does here is just back up a little bit more It allows the governor to wash his hands of it, and he doesn't have to sign this proclamation. But it preserves this as a state holiday. And I don't think that this is about erasing history, but I do think it's about reckoning with it. I mean, this is a really important part of the history of this body. And I think we should have the courage to do the right thing here and not punt this down the road. Let the governor avoid another, embarrassing moment where is forced to sign it, but we still keep it as a holiday. I think this is a moment where we actually have an opportunity to take on our history head on, actually address it, actually deal with it, and do what the governor intended to do in this legislation in the first place, which is eliminate this holiday from observance under Tennessee law.
Thank you for the history lesson. Do you care to comment on that, Senator Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my apologies. I probably should have addressed the posture of the bill, and in fact, Leader Yarbro is exactly right. There's an amendment that makes the bill. Leader Yarbro is very eloquent and passionate in his thoughts, and while I may agree with some and disagree with some, I certainly respect his position. Yeah. This is an administration bill from the governor, and like many pieces of legislation, it starts with a caption, and it gets amended, or certainly there's an amendment proposed to change the legislation. And the administration right now wants to deal with what I explained earlier relative to compelling a governor to proclaim days. If any member wishes to, in the future, to remove this day as a day of special observation, they certainly can do so at any time. The governor does not wish to use this particular vehicle at this time to do that, rather to address what I said earlier, whether it's Abraham Lincoln Day, which is one of the days, whether it's Mother's Day, whether it's Police Memorial Day. These are all, many, I would submit even most of these, are very worthy causes that I think we would unanimously embrace and support. It's a matter of the governor being compelled under state law to have to sign that piece of paper. So I respect Leader Yarbrough's position. It's just the administration does not wish to use this vehicle at this time to take on the matter that he would like to do so. So I'd appreciate favorable consideration.
To get the bill in the proper posture before the committee, the chair moves the amendment to the bill. Do we have a second? Senator White seconds the bill. So we now have the amendment that makes the bill before the committee, and I believe that Senator Yeager wishes to speak.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. My first question has been answered with whether the amendment had been put on. And I plan to support the bill as amended because for me it is a separation of powers issue. I would not want the governor telling the legislature what to do or not to do. Likewise, we shouldn't dictate to the governor. Now, my friend and colleague, Senator Yarbro, is very eloquent in his statement a moment or two ago, which is obviously fueled by his passion on this issue. And like the leader, I certainly agree and disagree with some points that you made, but I can't fault you for your passion or your eloquence on this issue. You very sincerely speak, but for me, there's a lot of ways to achieve results, and I feel like the best procedure here for me is this is a separation of powers issue, and that's why I can support it as amended. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Leader Yeager. Do we have any other comments on the amendment that's before the committee at this point? Yes, Senator Yarbrough.
I would point out as a kind of procedural matter, obviously we could make an amendment to still address the separation of powers concern and still preserve the intent of the original legislation as drafted by just removing the clause in the amendment that deletes the bill and add what's in the amendment as new language. So we obviously can do that today. That's within our power. And I think I do want to have an inquiry of the sponsor, which is, I mean, the bill was drafted in this way, like why did the change take place?
Leader Johnson.
Well, I wish I could give you a better answer than I'm going to give you, Leader Yarbro. As you might know and understand, as Majority Leader, I think I filed 40 or 50 different bills, maybe more than that, on behalf of the administration. And some of them are caption bills, some of them are substantive bills, and some of them I have to have a frank conversation with the governor about and say, I don't know if I can pass this. Maybe I can. I don't know. But we have a bill filing deadline. We try to get the bills in. But in my conversations with the governor, and I can say this firsthand, is that his issue was the requirement that he, as someone who campaigned for 2 years traveling across this state to become elected governor, and is duly and constitutionally elected as governor, and he shows up and he's informed that, hey, governor, by state law, you're required to sign this piece of paper. And that he had a problem with. And so in conversations with the administration, we came up with the amendment that addresses that issue. And that's what we're presenting for you today for your consideration.
I believe Senator Yeager has a question. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I move to call for the question.
Okay, we have a motion to call for the question at this point. Is there any objection to that? All in favor of calling for the question, say aye. Aye. Okay, where we're at right now. We have to vote the amendment on the bill first, so let's take a voice vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment?
Let's roll call it if we can, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, there's been a request for that. We'll do it. Let's do a roll call on the amendment.
Senator Gardenhire. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Jackson. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Kelsey. No. Senator Reeves. Aye. Votes aye. Senator White. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Yeager. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Yarbro. No. Votes no. Senator Dickerson. Chairman Briggs.
Aye.
Votes aye. Chairman, you have 6 ayes, 2 noes.
Okay, the amendment passes, and the amendment is now on the bill. So now we're on the bill. Do we have any further discussion on the bill? I see none. Leader Johnson, you have the opportunity to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the committee's consideration.
If there's no further discussion, let's call the roll.
Senator Gardenhire. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Jackson. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Kelsey. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Reeves. Aye. Votes aye. Senator White. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Yeager. Aye. Votes aye. Senator Yarbrough. No. Votes no. Senator Dickerson. Chairman Briggs.
Aye.
Votes aye. Chairman, you have 7 ayes, 1 no.
Senate Bill 2199 passes committee and will go to the Senate calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Leader.